So, Sloops. Now, I have to say, I'm rather glad with the fact that this channel always seems to come back to these. I'm proud of the fact that somehow, I don't know how this is, but the community which has grown up around my channel, and it is a community, that's one of the things which YouTube rams home to everyone, that the people who are watching your channel are a community, and honestly, having to chat to a fair proportion on Discord and in the comments and during the lives, I would agree with the community definition. That the community comes back to the topic of sloops quite so often. That you're all interested in them. And that's cool for me because I'm interested in them. I'm always interested in the idea of these ships which don't really get any attention. They're these little small ships, and they are, in wartime, suddenly people are going, wow, it's the great anti-submarine forces, these mass-produced forces, and you sort of go, well, World War One, the Flyer class, yeah, they were. World War Two, they were pre-ordered, they were ordered prior to World War Two, and, yeah, they're kind of building on forces which already exist, but even these are building on forces which already exist. Sloops are about a capability. They're a very flexible capability, and they're about basically the problems any major power finds themselves in. Because when you're a large enough power, you have a problem. You can either build ships that can do everything, which are probably going to be big ships, 10,000 plus tons usually, and they're going to have all sorts of equipment loaded on them. They're going to be big, they're going to be not expensive relative to other things to operate, but they are not going to be cheap. They're going to require a significant crew, they're going to require significant amount of resources to support. Or you can produce, but usually you produce at the same time, a load of smaller ships, up to 2,000 tons, which are relatively flexible and easily be adapted to the mission that you need them to do then. So you either build a ship which is capable of doing everything, ships which are capable of, the third option is ships which are capable of doing some core things, usually they're between 2 and 10,000 tons, and ships which can be capable of doing are adaptable to do everything. Usually less than 2,000 tons, and usually you're going to balance your fleet out between them. There's probably going to be core ships as well. Your capital ships, your core ships, whether they're aircraft carriers, battleships, battle cruisers, first rates, second rates, whatever they are, it doesn't really matter. They're going to be a number of them. They're going to be your core. They're what you're built around. The thing is, when we think about the ships having fights and, the big ships we sort of the names we remember, they're often the big ships, the 10,000 ton plus vessels. The ones that are status units, because again, the thing is, even if everyone needs the vessels of that sort of around 10,000 tons to be that flexible, to have that capability, they are going to be inevitably a status vessel, because they are going to be the things you deploy for everything, and they're going to be the names on that you deploy, and that's an important thing again. Ships' names, it's important to the crew, but it's also important to the wider public. It's important to, for a government to go, we're deploying this. Consider more recently, HMS Diamond deployed down to the Red Sea. Diamond. It's a name which has a long history in the Royal Navy. It's a respected name. What was the vessel deployed to the Mediterranean prior to that, which was doing other operations in the Mediterranean to deal with, what was going on there for NATO, etc., monitoring the Black Sea, monitoring what's going on in Israel. HMS Duncan, named for Admiral Duncan. Again, another name which has a long history in the Royal Navy. And the thing is, here's what happens. You'll go and look at newspaper articles. Whenever there's a serious article, i.e. something which is more than a couple of few sentences in a picture, they will give you the name of the ship, and they'll give you a bit of history associated with that name. And that gives the Royal Navy continuity. That gives the Royal Navy presence. That helps spread the Royal Navy's strength and its solidity as something that you can place your faith in, as something that's been there for generations. To adapt Cunningham takes 3 years to build a ship, 3 decades to build a crew, 3 centuries to build a tradition. Those things matter. Those things are the reality of what you're dealing with. But does that mean sloops aren't useful or aren't important? No, they're very important. They just get less attention. Unless you keep banging on about them. Unless people look at them. Because the thing is, they're easy to overlook because they're these small ships. And the reality is it's not interchangeable. Okay? Please, don't start standing there going, well, we could replace one 10,000-ton ship with 5 2,000-ton ships. You can't. Let me explain that why. The useful percentage of the hull goes down across 5. If you spread 10,000 tons over 5 vessels, let's say they're all 2,000 tons, you're going to be talking about 500 tons roughly for each ship for engineering and capabilities and machinery capabilities. You're going to be talking around about the same for the hotel facilities and things it needs to keep going. So that's about 1,000 tons. So that's 5,000 tons gone already. So you've got 5,000 tons of useful space, weight for weapons, for sensors, for all those systems you might need. This is a very, very rough approximation. This is an example one. It's not an actual one, but it's a rough one. Let's say I've got a 10,000 ton ship. Well, the reality is, I probably can get by with 750 and 750 tons for both those things. So even if though it's a 2,000 tons for the engines and hotel facilities, that still leaves me 8,000 tons to put into the things that I need to put into there. Weapons, sensors, helicopter. So the ship, the larger ship, is often far more potent and far more powerful individually. And even an aggregate of the 5 smaller ships won't equal it in firepower and capabilities. To have an equivalent level of capabilities, you'd be talking to have at least 8 of those smaller ships. But the thing is, a big ship can only be in one place at a time. And so the question is always, how many small ships versus how many big ships do you need? How many small ships will give you the presence you require, and presence is a big factor in deterrence and conflict management, versus how many big ships will give you the status you require to try and to also deter conflict. Conflict deterrence often comes with status units. Conflict management is done by presence units. Trials, Battles and Darings. I love that book. So, deterrence, presence and conflict management. What is the difference? Well, presence can count towards domestic as well as international relations. And it's even more fun when you've got an empire and all those things going around. So, it's quite fun and quite multifaceted. But the thing is, presence allows you to be part of the furniture. You are part of the scenario. Which means you automatically have a voice at the table, but it also means you usually, especially if done right, will know exactly who you need to talk to at table. Exactly who else needs to be at that table. And that can matter. Remember, finding a solution to a problem depends on as much as who is around the table as their willingness to actually engage with frank discussion about the problem. So for conflict management, if you wish to prevent war and deter conflict, because, let's be honest, war is bad for economics, then what you have to do is be able to make sure the right people are around the right table, talking in the right frame of mind. And that can require a range of soft and hard power, or smart power, as the modern phraseologies all are, but as we used to just call it, diplomacy. Used to be just diplomacy. And sometimes you'd use a warship and a naval officer to deliver diplomacy. Sometimes you'd use an ambassador. And sometimes you would send a merchant. All were available. What was the right tool for the situation? That's what matters. The correct tool for the problem. There is no one tool which solves all problems. And we have this again when we're dealing with small ships versus large ships in deterrence, presence, and conflict management. Constant refrain you hear from people is, we need more firepower on this ship, more firepower on that ship. Well, actually, that can cause you a problem. A, it's going to make that ship more expensive. Is that ship really going places that requires that firepower? 2, should that size of ship be going such places that require that amount of firepower in the first place? Because if it does, what are your better ships doing? If you don't have enough of your better ships doing, that's a completely different discussion than you should up-arm something which is not fundamentally shouldn't be going into that role. In this period, the Royal Navy has sloops, which are often armed with 4-inch guns and can be adapted to be minesweepers, can be Admiralty's yachts, can be oceanographic ships. They are, I would say, the low threat scenario, present ship. Have a slightly higher threat, you want to send something as a presence vessel to, that's what you have destroyers for. Today, if we're looking at the modern Royal Navy, and I'm going to use the modern Royal Navy as an example because the modern Royal Navy is becoming quite gradiated, which is useful for us to illustrate this. You have the Type 23 general purpose vessels, which are being replaced by the Type 31s, versus the River class. And the problem we're actually seeing at the moment with some of our deterrence missions is that because of their ages, and because the fact the Type 23s were not built to be in service as long as they were, and because some bright sparks sold off 3 of them, as well as didn't build at least 3 more Type 45s, when actually the probably sensible thing would be to put them into ordinary, i.e. reserve, and have them have a system whereby they rotated out of reserve into service when other ships had to go into full deep maintenance. So you could just, with the same personnel, you could basically be hot swapping the crews. You take the crew from one ship, that's going into reserve, that's going into refit, then it'll go into reserve. Okay, done. Or similar. You can do all sorts of options. And then, of course, you are also preserving the life of the hulls because you're giving them a bit of a rest. And you make it a long-term refit have less of an impact on your deployability forces. But leaving that towards one side, the fact is the Royal Navy has the rivers for the wider presence mission, but that's when it's constabulary presence, when it's maritime security presence, when it's limited threat. You also occasionally find minesweepers being used for that role as well. But they will usually turn up when it's specialist, when there's a mine threat as well. And please note, these vessels both are doing roles which are what sloops used to do. And there's no surprise once you start looking at their tonnage and displacement. Oh yeah, they're roughly, they're in sort of the up to 2,000 tons brackets. They are this, that. You know, it fits out quite quickly. Then you have the Type 23s, general purpose / Type 31s. They're general purpose assets, but they're also more task group assets. They're going to be part of a force, but they wouldn't be operating as a picket and everything like that. You got Type 26, which are your anti-submarine warfare frigates and are capable of being an ASW picket, but they're not going to be probably that far out of the force. They're going to be with any task group. And then you've got Type 45s, soon I hope in the future potentially the Type 83s, which are your big air warfare pickets, higher level deterrence, higher level capability, area air defense specialists. Type 83s might well end up being roughly 10,000 tons and might end up, therefore, being roughly for that role. Again, Type 45s and 10,000 tons are not a million miles away. And there's a reason for that. That's about the tonnage you're looking at whenever you're building a general purpose vessel that can be used wherever it needs to go in the world. Any time you're looking at roughly a lot less than 10,000 tons, you're looking at compromises. And it doesn't matter what period you're looking at. It's a really interesting thing to talk about with a naval architect. The fact that you have these sort of brackets, you're looking at, for present ships, you're looking for 2,000 tons or less. And often emphasis on off-the-shelf simple weapons that can simple weapons and equipment that can be easily supported in a bare bones to absolutely laissez-faire logistics supply system. And then you have your 10,000 tons. They bring everything with them, so they can support themselves in those circumstances because they have it with them to support themselves. And then you have the ships in between, which are variations on this theme, with compromises. And the thing is, all of this is management, this deterrence and presence. It's all about gauging the right capability. If we talk about Tsingtao in 1939, which we'll talk about in a bit, very specifically, the British did not go in to overawe the Japanese. They have heavy cruisers. They don't send a heavy cruiser. They're going in to face 3 heavy cruisers. The Magami class, the Ashigara and her sisters. And, Myoko class. Magamis are different ones. But, you know, they're going in, they're facing them, they're deterring them, and they're sending a light cruiser. So the idea that deterrence can only be done by sending something which is overwhelmingly more powerful than what is available, than what they have, what the other side have, is a misunderstanding. Because the thing is, what you're sending is a representative of what you have elsewhere. So you have to pitch it right, that you send something which is capable enough to be a statement, not so capable it's a threat. Where are you pushing it? That they can use it as an antagonization. That's one of the reasons, again, why underarmed vessels, for their size, perhaps like the River class, can actually be very useful. Because you send them along, that tells people you're paying attention. You're watching what's going on. But you're also, and this is the important and very critical thing, you're not sending, you're showing you are not really worried about them doing anything, because you're sending something which, if a proper warship goes against it, it doesn't have a chance. If a concerted enemy airstrike happens, it doesn't really have a chance. I know Michael Clapp, Commodore Michael Clapp of the 1982 Amphibious Task Group in the Falklands War. He has an earlier experience in his career where he's in a minesweeper, which is being overflown by enemy aircraft, threatening him. And it's in a period of high tension, not a period of war, and they hold their fire, and they're basically going through. Now, if you listen to some modern commentators, they'll go, "Oh, they should have had cam, they should have had this, they should have had that, so they could fire back at them." But the very fact they couldn't, the only thing he could track them with was cannon, meant that those aircraft could not claim provocation in any way. They couldn't justify it. No one could claim they were able to be provoked. And it was a freedom of navigation passage. Sometimes it helps to not be the most powerful warship in the room. But the thing is, you can't do that if you do not also have somewhere in your arsenal, operational and available when you need it, the biggest warship in the room, or a facsimile thereof. You can do those things when you have Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers sitting back in the UK and are able to all form up a full carrier battle group around them, which requires investment. If you want to go off and play those games, which is how we often describe it, but let's be honest, it's not really playing, and it's not really the kind of game that you could afford to lose. But the next thing, what's the other way of describing it? When we describe it as play those games, but what's the other way of describing it? Death matches? That sounds rather ominous and worrying, and people tend to not like that kind of phraseology, so we use the phrase games. And people like to use the phrase game theory. Now, pre-Jackie Fisher, the Royal Navy had a plethora of older ships that it could use for the President's mission. They were old enough that, frankly, no one could really claim they were going to provoke them, because it would be a case of, yeah, that's 25 years old. The fact it's afloat is a miracle of its crew. What's it provoking you by? The fact it's got leaking coal dust? The fact it's got ghosts older than your country? But Jackie Fisher needed to save money, so he started getting rid of them. And his idea on terms of presence and how to manage it was to have a focus on larger ships. And ships which would do occasional roving visits, i.e. the Invincible class. Now, of course, he's most famous for the Dreadnought, but let's be honest, Jackie Fisher was obsessed with deterring war, obsessed with conflict management. And that is where, if we think about it, the Invincible class Dreadnought armor cruiser, what becomes known as the Battle Cruiser, 2 words. Battle Cruiser, 1 word, is something which comes later. Battle Cruiser, 2 words. Well, having that as a presence, it can go around the world and looks very big and very scary. It's got massive size. One of the advantages of battlecruisers is designing for speed means they're often bigger than battleships. So they look impressive. They really do. And it's got big guns, the same as a battleship. Again, looks very impressive. Very, very impressive. So it turns up, and if it's visiting your port, it looks bigger and tougher. Now, we all know the reality. Okay? We know the armor coverage on a battlecruiser is terrible. We know that the subdivision is not as good as a battleship. We know they've got more of a lozenge system going on than a honeycomb structure. All sorts of things. We know all that. But the thing is, we know that now. And we know that in hindsight, looking back in history. If you're around in the period prior to World War I, and a battlecruiser shows up at your door looking big and impressive and sexy as anything in your port, Well, I doubt you're going to think the same as you do now. There is a small problem, though. Presence. And you can argue that the idea was to use town-class light cruisers, and honestly, considering the Royal Navy, the Royal Navy, the real show of why the Germans never had a chance in the Anglo-German naval race. People always focus in on the dreadnoughts. They always focus in on the big ships. If you look at Jutland, and I've done a video about the constructing of fleets at Jutland, once you start going down into light cruisers, once you start going down into the forces below the dreadnoughts, you start to realise they have no chance. Because a fleet is not just its battleships, a fleet is not just its core ships. Those are important, but you need a balanced fleet. The Royal Navy in the age of sail, the Napoleonic era, had to always keep a balance of its fleet. So yes, it had first rates like HMS Victory. It had some second rates as well. But the vast majority of the ships of the line were third rates. And if you go down and look at the vast majority of warships in service in the Royal Navy, they're fifth and sixth rates. Those are the critical numbers, because they give you the presence. They give you the ability to escort convoys in wartime, to relay messages in battle, because let's be honest, you're going to need something to relay messages which is not in the middle of the frigating line getting covered in carronade and cannon smoke. They're going to be carrying messages between the various squadrons. They're going to be acting as pickets on various blockades. They're going to be doing all sorts of things around the world. In fact, a constant thing for the Royal Navy is, despite the huge number of frigates and smaller ships they had in service, fifth and sixth rate vessels, they never had enough. Never had enough. And yes, when we're talking about modern ships, we often start talking about uncrewed vessels and helicopters, maximising their presence and maximising the ability to smaller forces to have presence and filling in for some of the smaller vessels that used to exist. But the fact is, you still need the ship there, in the region, in the area, and able to do its task. A ship can only be in one physical space at a time. And if you're looking at what we normally used to consider wartime levels of operations, okay, the rule of three, which is commonly used, is one ship in maintenance or refit, one ship in training or transit, and one ship on station. That's normally what we use to describe it. That's considered wartime ratios of utility. If you want a good example of what are not wartime ratios of utility, SSBNs, ballistic missile submarines, the nuclear deterrent. That's a 4-ship force to guarantee one vessel on patrol, 2 in refit or maintenance, 1 in transit and training. That's what you should be dealing with. So if you've got a ship positioned out there, yes, you can do forward basing. And that's great. That can cut down your requirements for ships, because you don't have to worry about the transit time. But you're still going to need another ship that can cover where it's needed to go. So maybe you have 3 ships forward. You're still going to need 6 ships overall, because what you're going to have to do is have 3 ships at home which rotate out to cover when one of those other 3 ships, those forward ships, has to go in for their maintenance. Otherwise you don't have presence in the region. You have a ship sitting in a harbour. And also, the other thing, when you do forward maintenance, of course, then you've got to deal with the fact that all that money for dry docking and maintaining those ships is now going to not stay in your economy. It's going to go out to other nations. It's going to support other nations' economies, other nations' ports, other nations' infrastructure. Maybe that's worthwhile for you. Maybe that's something you think is a good idea. Maybe that makes things work. World War One was a problem. World War One was a growing problem. It starts off as a mine problem, because let's be honest, whilst we all love to focus on torpedoes from submarines, mines were actually far more lethal and far more of a problem. Torpedoes have a habit of going in their own way, whereas a nice string of mines, that usually turns into an absolute nightmare to deal with. And the advantage of mines is that they can be laid by a submarine with virtually no risk. They can turn up, they can lay the mines, and they can skedaddle out of there. They don't have to wait around in a high threat area. They don't have to put themselves at great risk by revealing their position by launching torpedoes. They don't have to do anything like that. They just deploy the mines. So unsurprisingly, the first Flower class, the Flower class Sloops of World War One, are ordered as minesweepers. That's what they're looking at the duties for. They're going, we need lots of vessels as minesweepers. Every ship can be a minesweeper once, but you prefer to have specialist ships for the role. Or at least ships which you don't mind losing if they muck it up, rather than using, I don't know, battleships, dreadnought battleships as minesweepers. It's kind of like using fleet aircraft carriers in anti-submarine hunting groups. They're just things you shouldn't probably do. And here comes the Acacia class. They're fine little ships. And they are completely adapted to being adaptable. They have a very basic weapons fit. They have a very basic engine fit. Everything is off the shelf. This is available. We have this. We have this in stock. We have this available. There is not a single thing fitted to these ships which is requiring any research, any development at all. Literally, they are just, we have all these parts, put them together, build. And build as many of them as you can. Keep on building. Build. And so they do. Displaced 1,200 tons. Length 250 feet between the perpendiculars. Overall 262 feet. It's roughly 80 meters. Beam 33 foot, or roughly 10 meters. Draft 12 foot, or 3.7 meters. Power 2 cylindrical boilers supplying a single 4-cylinder triple expansion engine to drive one screw. If you're thinking that sounds very similar to the World War II corvettes, which are the Flower class corvettes, you would not be wrong. There is a sort of standard thing. Again, if you're talking about building a sloop, there are only so many things you need to put into it, and frankly, you might as well build that size hull. And they're designed for, well, 1,400, 1,800 horsepower to make 17 knots. It was found to require closer to 2,200 indicated horsepower, or, well, that's equivalent to 1,640 kilowatts for the speed. Once you work it out, it's easier to work out the horsepower into kilowatts and to try and figure that one out than it's necessarily always work out HP to IHP, because indicated horsepower and horsepower do not always equal the same thing. There's also shaft horsepower, which is a measurement of how much horsepower actually gets supplied to the shaft, and that's an interesting stat to find. Basically, you find out very much of this class that there is because they are literally getting what's available, there is some, for want of a better turn of phrase, variance. Variance is what we will go with. A very nice academic historian's phrase, variance in the data and capabilities of individual units vis-a-vis the class theoretical standards. Variance vis-a-vis those standards. That's what we're going with. Complement 77. Armament. Please note the phrase as designed. I do love the fact that that appears in books, that appears in the Wikipedia page, it appears almost everywhere you look at these things. It goes, armament as designed. That tells you exactly what the crews did. 2 12-pounder 76mm guns and 2 3-pounder 47mm guns. It's fun. They're capable, and they're up to it. Ships of the class. There's a fair number of them. And this is just the first batch of flowers built in World War One. Acacia, anemone, aster, bluebell, daffodil, dahlia, daphne, foxglove, hollyhock, honeysuckle, iris, jaquil, laburnum, larkspur, lavender, lilac, lily, magnolia, mallow, marigold, mimosa, primrose, sunflower, and veronica. When you look at them, you go, well, they were pretty much all ordered, launched, and commissioned in 1915. This class was very rapidly deployed, and again, it's another thing to think about in World War II, in World War One and World War II terminology. The fact that Britain could do this. In World War One, it's a lot easier than World War Two. The legacy of the treaties. In World War One, the Admiralty could turn around and go, "We need some generic small warships to do generic small warship stuff." And the yards would go, "How many?" And the Navy would go, "Keep building them until we just tell you to stop." Okay. Royal Navy wakes up and goes, "Oh. Well, we have over 100 of those." To be fair, they had roughly 112. Although, considering some of them were sunk during the war, I don't think the Royal Navy ever actually got to 112 in service, but they did build 112. And another 8 were built for the French. The British lost 17, the French lost 1. So 120 built, 102 survived World War One. $102. Think about that. Convoys needed roughly 4 to 8 escorts. Usually we get a mixture of destroyers and the sloops. So that lot could end up protecting 25, 30 convoys at a time. That's something useful. That's something of value. And they had service post World War One. In fact, some of them managed to make it into World War Two. Oh, good lord! Some of them managed to make it all the way into World War Two quite happily and kept on working. You know, this ship damaged in World War Two. Gets turned into a base ship and a guard ship and base ship. Survives being dive bombed. Laburnum here. Oh. She's a drill ship in Singapore from 1935 onwards, after having served in various duties and various portions of the British Empire, and lost finally in February 1942 during the fall of Singapore. Veronica. Veronica. Here she is serving in New Zealand Navy. She was a critical ship when the wharf, as you can see, this is after the Hawke's Bay earthquake in Port Arthur during 1931, and she is the ship which calls in aid because she has a working radio and can get out messages. Without her, her crew, and what they got up to, it would have been a very different circumstance. The fact that her back was pretty much broken during this by the earthquake, by the literal bay floor rising up underneath her, In fact, she's still working, still being used to sort things out, and gets back and stays in service for another 4 years, is a testimony to their capabilities and strength. It really is. Post-World War One. The thing is, once you get after World War One, admittedly the Royal Navy has to suddenly decide what it's going to do with itself. It has a global empire to protect. It has a reputation in a way that it feels it has to rebuild, because Jutland didn't go the way it wanted to. Didn't go the way its traditions, its culture demanded it go. And on top of that, eventually their governments had various ideas of naval treaties. Now, one of the things the Royal Navy is fairly capable of securing throughout these naval treaties is the ability to build as many ships under 2,000 tons as they wish. There is no limit on numbers as long as they do not compete speed-wise with destroyers or armament-wise with destroyers, i.e. no torpedoes and nothing faster than 20 knots. And that's fine. These ships, the sloops, they are designed to be adaptable. The thing the Royal Navy can be using 1 week as a yacht for an admiral. And an admiral's yacht is a very interesting thing. The China Station is a good example of often having those ones. Because basically it's a social status space which is smaller and able to navigate more freely in those regards than the admiral's flagship, for them to have quiet diplomatic meetings when they need to. But also, it's a small vessel which basically is at the admiral's disposal. And the admiral can send it where they wish, without needing to worry anyone. It's not something like deploying cruisers and having to tell the government what you're doing with it. No, the admiral's yacht is at the admiral's complete and utter disposal. One was also maintained as the Admiralty yacht. One was also used, to support various other operations. But they were also used as oceanography vessels, going around charting the world's oceans. They were used as minesweepers, mine layers, escorts, anti-submarine warfare specialists. Pretty much every single specialist area could be accommodated in ships, and they could adjust to the growing needs in an area or the reducing needs in an area by adapting those vessels between their roles. It gave the Royal Navy a tremendous amount of flexibility. It gave the Royal Navy a tremendous amount of adaptability. And that was important. That was really important, because for the Royal Navy, adaptability and flexibility are critical. And this is all founded by the experience of operating the Flower class. You see, prior to that, and prior to Jackie Fisher's decisions, again, old ships had always been used. Now they had a template of, these are the new standard small ships, these are what we build. These are what we can work with. And how many do we need is a question. Now, I would argue that Britain should have really been building more sloops. And there were lots of admirals at the time who were arguing it, but that was mainly because the idea was that you could maintain, thanks to the Royal Navy Reserve and Royal Navy Volunteer Reserves, a force of, and the wider British Empire, a force of on-call sort of reserve force of anti-submarine warfare specialist vessels for convoy escorting. Instead of you having to have a wartime emergency build, let's say you keep building 8 of these a year, and they serve 10 years in regular naval service and 10 years in reserve. Okay, again, they don't need... one of those things is these ships don't need to be fast, so it's quite easy for them to be designed to be fairly good, fairly competent, fairly easily upgradable with the off-the-shelf equipment that's available. You can do that without too much risk and too much trouble. And let's say you decide steam turbines are better for ASDIC operations than triple expansion engines. Well, you're building, therefore, these Sloops. You build them with steam turbines, and those are the same size turbines which are going to destroyers. So you're building and firming up your infrastructure for your destroyers later on. It's a useful investment. It would have given the Royal Navy a force of at least 160 such vessels, with the beginning of World War II to call upon. If we consider the roughly 300 plus Flower class built in World War II, including modified, etc. Well, 160 Sloops as a base point would have been kind of useful. And, again, you could have quite easily, from 1937 onwards, decided to up the construction load, or even maybe even earlier, to 16 a year, if you really wanted to. Because, again, the treaties never limit them. As long as they don't carry torpedoes, less than 20 knots top speed, designed for less than 20 knots top speed. If it works out more than 20 knots, we didn't design it. How are we supposed to know that combination will make it more than 20 knots? We designed it with governors on the turbines. How would we predict that the crew would take the governors off the turbines? All sorts of options. But no, you could have given yourself a fairly hefty force to start off World War II with, and well, that could have been problematic. But we'll leave that side for the Germans. We'll leave that to one side. We go to the actual Tsingtao incident. Captain Brind, HMS Birmingham, are sent to Tsingtao to release the SS St. Vincent de Paul, which was captured by customs, which were in their position thanks to the Imperial Japanese Army. And then they taken the ship to an Imperial Japanese Navy base. And, well, the British didn't send Birmingham in alone. No, they gave her the fire support of Folkestone. Why? Because A, there is a status, there is a value in bringing a second ship along. There is, the capability of going, well, we've got a second ship. Do you really want to do this? We have sent in a squadron, not a single ship. Secondly, a sloop and a light cruiser versus 3 heavy cruisers sounds even less likely you're coming to try and provoke a fight. Thirdly, you have something to stick the other side of the merchant vessel, which is useful because that's going to make it less likely for the Japanese customs to carry out a reboarding. And finally, who is a more regular visitor to these harbours, the sloops or the light cruisers? It's the sloops. The fact is, it's like taking your local specialist with you. They know the harbour, they know the way in, they know the way out, because they've done it so many times before. They know what they're doing. That's useful. That gives you an advantage when it comes to the requirements of carrying out your mission. But still, it's a sloop. When the Japanese turn their guns on HMS Birmingham as she's leaving with the SS Vincent de Paul, Folkestone is at the front of the little sort of convoy. She also spins her little 4-inch guns around and goes, I will fight. At the ranges they were actually at, and I've done some maths on this over the last couple of days because I made a bit point in talking about it live. Whilst I don't think she does any damage to anything with significant amounts of armour on them, and the Myoko class are not the worst armoured of Japanese cruisers. Sorry. I was saying Italian. Who knows? I'm better than I was, but still not 100% there. Still in the Gulf of Coffee. But she's also close enough that that 4-inch shell could hit things. You know, Brind is pointing Birmingham's 6-inch guns at every single one of the heavy cruiser's bridges, and has the last turret focusing on their headquarters ashore, just to make his point. I think... I'm not sure what Folkestone's 4-inch gun would add to that impact on a bridge, but there's also part of me which thinks that actually, if the fight had broken out, Folkestone could well have survived. Another reason I have with her, but let me explain why I think she could have survived. They're all focused on Birmingham. They're all focused on her, and frankly, her torpedoes, her guns at that close range, it's going to cause devastating damage. Yes, Birmingham is not getting out alive, in the nicest way. We're talking engagement ranges of potentially at one point as low as 200 meters. Some of them potentially closer than that. The longest range engagement we're talking about is 300 to 400 meters. This is a point at which, frankly, it doesn't matter if you're firing 6-inch or 8-inch shells. You ain't got any armor that's going to withstand that thing at that range. You're just not. And if it's going to take out your bridges, well, you're going to cease to have a superstructure. Which is going to make you frigging ineffective at trying to track down a sloop which is firing its guns but also producing smoke and under orders to get away to send signals back to the UK and tell them what's happened. I just don't think you're going to do it. So, this gives me leads me into another interesting lineup in the modern sort of consideration. Because say you have HMS Belfast, Town Class. Cruiser, of course. One of the larger varieties of Town Class cruiser, but still Town Class cruiser like Birmingham was. And you have a modern River class with her. You do. HMS Tamar. Wonder why I picked this picture. If any of you do not know, the River Tamar is the river which, how do I put it, serves as the border between Cornwall and Devon. Okay? It's an important river. When we cross it, my mum says, now I feel at home. She considers everyone the other side of the Tamar, the wrong side of the Tamar as she considers it, foreigners. It's an interesting conversation to have with some of my cousins as well. HMS Tamar. She's been in service since 2019. Technically, well, christened 2019. She's been technically in service since 2020. And she's forward deployed to the Indo-Pacific as we speak. She is wandering around, visiting the British Indian Ocean territory this year. She's visited done various exercises off Sri Lanka. She's been to the east coast of China. She's done all sorts of operations in the South Pacific. She is showing the flag. Yeah, we turn up there occasionally with Carabao crew. Yeah, we occasionally have ships passing through. This is our presence in this region. This is going around keeping our friendships alive. And you can say, well, wouldn't it be better to have a bigger ship? But then you have to spend money to deploy a bigger ship. And the thing is, she's not there to be the big ship on station. She's there to represent the big ships back home. She's there to show interest. She's there to build friendship. She's there to build relationships. She's there for conflict management. If we need to send something else to do deterrence, we send something bigger to do deterrence. If we need to send something bigger, even bigger to show intent, we send something bigger to show intent. But that's not her job. I have to admit, yes, I do think the 30mm gun on the front and pretty much the 2 machine guns and 2 miniguns is not enough firepower, but I wouldn't say you need to expand their firepower massively. I'd say for what they are, what they're doing, I would like them to have firepower appropriate to the rest of the service. I.e., I'd like it to be what do we have in the other ships of the service which are useful? And I'd say the 40mm that's going on the Type 31s is probably a perfect weapon for them. And then people then turn to go, well, what about 57mm? That requires a lot more support. That requires a lot more maintenance than a 40mm, a lot more costs to support it and look after it compared to the 40mm. So yeah, I would say the 40mm is probably a slightly better improved weapon of what they currently carry. But the thing is, what are the ship's purpose? What is their role? Are they supposed to be fighting wars? No. The thing is, they can be fitted rather like other ships. They could be fitted with systems to support uncrewed aviation assets for anti-submarine warfare. They could probably be fitted with a form of dipping sonar quite quickly. They could be fitted with probably some other systems to help deal with submarines. All potentially. Or, considering some of the racks I've seen at various defence shows, they could be fitted with mine-laying gear. They could do all sorts of different options, if you needed them to, in wartime. But in peacetime, what are they doing? They're going around, showing the flag, making friends. And telling people, we're here. We're here to stay. It's better for us to talk to you, and you to talk to us. Let's all get together around a table. And, by the way, would you like some food while we're at it? Maybe a little bit of wine, maybe a little bit of beer, maybe some whiskey. Let's talk. Again, these days, whenever we have hard power doing soft power things, or soft power threatening hard power things, we have to call it smart power. But really, it's just diplomacy. We've been doing it for a long time. Sometimes people in very nice coats and suits who look all smart and dapper, sometimes they deliver the words of steel. And sometimes the people in uniforms deliver the words of cake. And sometimes it's the other way around. What matters is that you have the right messenger for the right situation. What matters with presence is that you're there. The fact is, if you want to be really clever and do the whole smart power thing, what you can do is use the visit of vessels like this, which are often turning up, often visiting, are going to be a regular occurrence, to have meetings. And if you set up the practice that whenever they turn up, they invite people aboard anyway, it doesn't cause any strangeness. Oh yeah, the Royal Navy's the River class ships turning up. Have they done the usual invites? Oh yeah, they usually have good food on those. Okay, yeah, we'll go. British ambassadors going to be there as they normally are. Oh, they always are. Oh, frigate. And then they get aboard, and the ambassador sidles up and goes, it's a lovely, lovely day. You know, one of the interesting things Tamar saw as she was coming in was you appear to be having a bit of an exercise over right next to your neighbour's island. Yeah. It's always good to exercise. It keeps everything sharp, doesn't it? But you always have to be careful when you're exercising, because people could get the wrong idea. It's terrible, really. Are you enjoying the canapes? Really, try them with some cheese. It's fantastic. It'll blow your mind. And you can do that with a small ship because it's got the big ship behind it. too often people try and treat it as an either or. You either have the small ship or you have the big ship. And you can't afford to have you can't afford not to have either. You need both to be able to do the job properly. You need the small ships to be able to have enough hulls to do the presence. You need the big ships to have enough power to make the presence count. And you need enough big ships to be able to do deterrence when you need it. So when the small ship goes, this mission, this is above my pay grade. They've gotten beyond my level. Okay, well this month's visit, instead of being you, will be done by us. And a bigger, sleeker, a lot meaner looking vessel turns up and takes the place. A Type 45, or maybe the government decides it's only a small increase in problems, so they send a Type 31. But they've got the options. They can go for a Type 31, or they can go for a Type 26, or they can go for a Type 45. They can work up the levels and go, what suits this situation? Do we match? Do we underwhelm? Or do we overplay? What do we do? What's the best What's the best case for this situation? What's the best going to work our interests? And here's something else you can think about, because if you've got small vessels like this, they're great for training up young officers to in command and giving them early command experiences, where you can go, hang on, the commander of this destroyer used to do that beat. They know the people. That destroyer's available. Send them. Because you've got then a big ship turning up, but you've also got personal connections involved. And then you've got another reason for people to be invited aboard. Oh, you invited people who who haven't been getting invited recently because their roles have changed. Why are they being invited? Oh, well, this guy's back, or this lady's back in command of the destroyer that's visiting, and so as they knew them, they've invited them as well. Oh. And then the people who need to are put around a dinner table together. And after dinner, maybe they go off and have a chat in a quiet corner in the officers' mess. A quiet discussion, and things get solved. It's far better. Jaw is far better than war. As I put it the other day, both Teddy Roosevelt and Churchill like to come up with sayings for this. Teddy Roosevelt is my more preferred one. Walk softly, carry a big stick. Well, the thing is, there is a difference between what I call small stick energy and big stick energy. Small stick energy, you have to always shove the stick in people's face and go, look how big it is, look how big it is, I have a big stick, I have a stick. Big stick energy, it hangs behind you and you don't even mention it. You don't need to mention it. Similar between small dogs and big dogs. Reason small dogs always seem to be making so much more noise than big dogs is small dogs need to tell you how big and dangerous they are. Big dogs just look at you and go, you can see me, right? Don't need to say anything else, do I? And honestly, that is something to think about when you're talking about conflict management and deterrence. Being a constant presence matters. And if you're a constant presence, you don't have to start waving big sticks under people's noses. Because often they'll realize there is a big stick not far away. Or that will come if there's a problem. Because you're there. You're walking softly, but you're always walking around them. And that can allow you to solve a lot of problems a lot more cheaply than with war. Anyway. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I was thinking about what sort of question to come up with for this video and what sort of topic to discuss. Especially as today, when it comes out, will be Boxing Day. And I decided to do this. I'd like you to think carefully. Everyone who's answers to think very carefully. At what level do you think a river class, as it's currently configured, is the best methodology of dealing with a threat in a presence mission? At what level would you say that upgrades to requiring a Type 31? At what level it would upgrade to requiring a Type 26? And at what level it would upgrade to requiring a Type 45? Anything above that is going to be a carrier battle group level. If you want to say at what level you require one of those to turn up, I'd love to hear your ideas. Basically, my theory is at some point in the year of the aircraft carrier, I'm going to do a longer discussion over what the actual realities of deterrence and conflict management are, and how you work out and what you are sort of deploying at which level. But before I get into that conversation, I would like to have an idea of some of your opinions as to what level you think they should be being deployed, at what level you think that is the suitable asset. I'd love to know. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Hope you had a good Christmas. And thank you again for all your support. Frankly, this channel, I wouldn't be able to do any of this without it, so thank you very much. Take care, and have fun.